I stood in my kitchen 3 days after burying my husband, holding my phone with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The screen showed my bank account balance. 0. Not just the checking account, the savings account we'd built over 37 years. The retirement account Tom and I had protected like it was sacred. All of it. Gone. And when I called the bank, when I finally got through the automated system to an actual human being, the woman on the other end said those words that made my stomach drop. Your son David handled the transfer. He had power of attorney. He said you knew. But I didn't know. I didn't know anything. If this story has already touched your heart, subscribe now, leave a like, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. Let me take you back 6 weeks, before the funeral, before the hospital, before everything fell apart. Tom and I were sitting at the kitchen table on a Tuesday morning. Sun was coming through the window over the sink. He was reading the paper. I was drinking coffee that had gone cold because I'd been staring at the same paragraph in a book for 20 minutes. We'd been married since I was 22. He was the only man I'd ever loved. We had 2 children. David, our oldest, was 41. Sarah was 38. David had always been ambitious, smart. He went to State University on a partial scholarship, graduated with honors, got his MBA. He worked in finance, made good money, drove a nice car, had a house in the suburbs with a pool. Sarah was quieter. She taught elementary school, married a good man, had 3 kids we adored. She called me every Sunday. David called when he needed something. But that morning, Tom looked up from his paper and said something I should have paid more attention to. He said David had been asking about our accounts, our assets, the house. Tom said it felt strange, like David was counting something that wasn't his to count yet. I laughed it off. I said David was just being practical, planning ahead, taking care of us. Tom folded his paper and looked at me with those gray eyes that always saw through my excuses. He said we needed to be careful. We needed to make sure everything was protected, clear, legal. I promised him we'd talk to the lawyer. We'd update the will. We'd handle it after the holidays. We had time. We didn't have time. 2 weeks later, Tom had a heart attack, collapsed in the garage while he was changing the oil in his truck. I found him there when I got home from the grocery store. The ambulance came. They worked on him for 30 minutes in our driveway while neighbors stood on their porches and watched. They got his heart beating again, got him to the hospital, but he never really came back. He was in the ICU for 12 days, machines breathing for him, tubes everywhere. David showed up the second day. He walked into that hospital room with his briefcase, his suit, his phone in one hand. He looked at Tom, looked at the monitors. Then he looked at me and said we needed to talk about logistics. That's the word he used, logistics, like his father was a problem to be managed. I should have thrown him out right then, but I was so tired, so scared. I hadn't slept. I'd been sitting in that chair by Tom's bed for 2 days straight. My back hurt. My eyes hurt. I kept thinking if I looked away, if I left the room, Tom would slip away while I wasn't watching. So when David said we needed to handle paperwork, when he said we needed to make sure I was protected, when he pulled out documents and a pen and told me to sign, I signed. I signed because I trusted him, because he was my son, because I was drowning and he was supposed to be throwing me a lifeline. He said it was standard stuff, power of attorney, just temporary, just so he could handle bills while I focused on Tom, just so I wouldn't have to worry about the house payment or the insurance or any of it. He said he'd take care of everything, and I believed him. I signed my name on 4 different pages. I didn't read them. I just signed. My reading glasses were in my purse. My purse was back in the waiting room. Everything felt foggy, distant, like I was underwater. David smiled, squeezed my shoulder, said I could relax now. He had it handled. Then he left, went back to work, to his conference calls, his important meetings. Sarah stayed. She sat with me, held my hand, cried with me. When Tom died, when the machines finally stopped and the nurses pulled me gently away from his bed, Sarah was the one who held me up. David showed up for the funeral, shook hands, accepted condolences, gave a eulogy that made people cry. Then he disappeared again. 3 days after the funeral, I needed to pay for the catering bill. The church ladies had brought food to the house, casseroles, pies, sandwiches, but we'd also hired someone for the reception. They'd sent an invoice. I went to write a check, opened my checkbook. Then I thought I should check the balance first, make sure everything was clear. Tom had always handled the finances. I knew we had savings, knew we were comfortable. Not rich, But secure? We'd paid off the house 10 years ago, had money set aside for emergencies, for retirement, for leaving something to the kids. I logged into the bank account on my phone. It took me 3 tries to remember the password. When I finally got in, I stared at the screen for a full minute before my brain processed what I was seeing. 0. I refreshed the page, checked again, logged out, logged back in. Still 0. I called the bank, got transferred twice. Ended up talking to a woman named Michelle who sounded young and professional and deeply uncomfortable. She pulled up my account. There was a long pause. Then she said there'd been transfers. Multiple transfers over the past 2 weeks, all initiated by David Thompson, my son. She said he'd moved everything, checking, savings. The retirement account had been liquidated. There were penalties, taxes owed, but the money was gone, moved to accounts in his name. Michelle said he'd had legal authority, power of attorney. She said the documents were in order. She said there was nothing the bank could do. She suggested I contact a lawyer. I hung up, sat on the kitchen floor. The linoleum was cold. I could smell dish soap from the sink. I'd washed dishes that morning, had gone through the motions, made coffee, fed the cat, pretended I was functioning. Now I was sitting on the floor of my empty house with empty accounts and a son who'd stolen my entire life while I was burying his father. The catering bill was due Friday. I had 4 days. I had no money, and I had no idea what I was supposed to do next. I called David. He didn't answer. I called again. Voicemail. I called Sarah. She answered on the first ring. She could hear it in my voice, the panic, the disbelief. I told her what happened. She went quiet. Then she said she'd be right over. She lived 40 minutes away, but she made it in 30. Walked into my kitchen and hugged me so hard I couldn't breathe. We sat at the table, the same table where Tom and I had coffee 6 weeks ago, where he'd warned me about David, where I'd promised to protect us. Sarah pulled out her phone, started making calls. She tried David. No answer. She tried his wife, Jessica. Straight to voicemail. She called David's office. His assistant said he was unavailable. In meetings all day, Sarah left a message. Polite, firm, said it was urgent, family emergency, call back immediately. Then we waited. The clock on the wall ticked. I hadn't wound it in days. It was running slow. Outside, a neighbor was mowing their lawn. Normal sounds, normal day, but nothing was normal. My phone buzzed. Text from David. Can't talk now. We'll call later. Everything's fine. Don't worry. Sarah read it over my shoulder. She said some things I won't repeat. Then she said we needed to go to the bank. In person. With documents. Marriage certificate. Death certificate. Tom's will. Proof I was Tom's widow. Proof this was community property. Proof David had no right to any of it. We spent the next hour digging through files. Tom had kept everything organized. Always said you never know when you'll need proof of something. There were folders labeled, color-coded, birth certificates, social security cards, the deed to the house, insurance policies, and the will, Tom's will. We'd updated it 5 years ago, split everything 50-50 between David and Sarah, after I died. After. Not before, not now, not while I was still alive and still needed to eat and pay bills and exist in the world. Sarah made copies of everything. We drove to the bank. It was Monday afternoon. The parking lot was half full. Inside, it smelled like air conditioning and carpet cleaner. We asked to speak to a manager. Got directed to a small office with glass walls and a fake plant in the corner. The manager's name was Robert, late 50s, glasses, kind eyes. He listened while I explained, while Sarah handed him documents, while I tried not to cry in front of a stranger. He looked at everything, pulled up the account history on his computer, frowned, clicked through screens. Then he said what Michelle had said. The transfers were legal. David had power of attorney. The documents were properly notarized, properly filed. The bank had followed protocol. Robert said he was sorry. He said it happened more often than people thought. Family members with access, elderly parents who signed things they didn't fully understand. But I wasn't elderly. I was 62, sharp, capable. I'd just been tired, grieving, trusting my own child. Robert said I needed a lawyer. He wrote down a name, someone he knew who handled these cases. Elder financial abuse, that's what he called it. Those words made me feel small, helpless, old, like I'd failed some basic test of competence. Sarah thanked him, took the paper with the lawyer's name. We walked back to the car. She was furious. I was numb. She drove me home, stayed until dark, made me eat something, leftover casserole someone had brought. It tasted like cardboard. Before she left, she hugged me again, told me she'd handle David, told me I wasn't alone, told me we'd fix this. But as I watched her taillights disappear down the street, I wondered how you fix something like this, how you come back from your own child stealing your security, your dignity, your husband's legacy. The house felt enormous, empty. Every room echoed. I walked through it like a stranger. This was the house where Tom and I raised our kids, where David learned to ride a bike in the driveway, where Sarah had her high school graduation party in the backyard, where Tom and I sat on the porch every summer evening and talked about nothing and everything. Now it felt like a museum, full of ghosts and memories, and a silence so heavy I could barely breathe. I went to bed that night knowing two things. I had no money, and I had a son who'd counted on me being too broken to fight back. He was wrong. The funeral was behind me now. The shock was wearing off, and underneath the grief, underneath the betrayal, something else was waking up. Something cold, clear, determined. David thought he could take everything while I was down. Thought I'd be too polite, too embarrassed, too afraid of family drama to make it public. He thought I'd protect his reputation. Let him get away with it to avoid scandal. Keep the peace. He didn't know me as well as he thought he did. The lawyer's name was Patricia Chen. I called her office Tuesday morning. Her assistant said she had an opening Thursday afternoon. I took it. Thursday felt like a lifetime away. I spent Tuesday and Wednesday digging through every file in the house, every box in the garage, every drawer in Tom's desk. I needed to understand exactly what David had taken, exactly what he'd done. I found the power of attorney documents, copies David had left in a folder marked important. I read them, really read them. They weren't temporary, they weren't limited. They gave David complete control over everything: bank accounts, property, investments, medical decisions, everything. And they were permanent, effective immediately, revocable only if I went to court and proved I was competent to handle my own affairs. That's when I realized how carefully he'd planned this, how long he'd been waiting. He didn't steal from me on impulse. He'd set it up, positioned himself, then waited for the perfect moment, when I was weak, distracted, desperate. I found something else too, a letter, tucked into Tom's desk drawer, hidden under some old tax returns. It was addressed to me, in Tom's handwriting, dated 2 weeks before his heart attack, before the hospital, before everything. I sat on the floor of his office and read it. My hands were shaking so hard the paper rattled. Tom said he'd been thinking about our future, about what would happen if something happened to him. He said David had been calling him, asking questions about our assets, our estate, how much the house was worth, how much we had saved. Tom said something felt off, wrong, like David was circling, waiting. Tom said he'd made an appointment with our lawyer, wanted to set up protections, trusts, make sure I'd be taken care of, make sure the house stayed in my name, make sure nobody could touch anything until I was gone. The appointment was scheduled for the Monday after his heart attack. He never made it. I folded the letter, put it in my purse. It wasn't proof exactly, but it was Tom's voice, his concern, his attempt to protect me. And it made me even more certain that David had known exactly what he was doing. Thursday afternoon, I walked into Patricia Chen's office building, downtown, 5th floor, glass doors with her name etched in gold letters. The waiting room had leather chairs and magazines nobody reads. I sat there for 10 minutes feeling out of place, feeling like I should have worn something nicer than jeans and my old cardigan. My knee hurt. I'd twisted it somehow getting out of the car. Small, stupid pain on top of everything else. The receptionist called my name, led me down a hallway to a corner office with windows overlooking the street. Patricia was younger than I expected, maybe late 40s, dark hair pulled back, sharp suit. She shook my hand, offered me coffee. I said no. She sat behind her desk and folded her hands and said, "Tell me everything." So I did. I told her about Tom's heart attack, about David showing up with documents, about signing the power of attorney in the ICU waiting room, about checking the bank account, about everything being gone, about calling David and him not answering, about the text saying everything was fine. Patricia took notes, asked questions. How much money? What accounts? What dates? What documents? She asked if I had copies. I pulled them out of my purse, the power of attorney, the bank statements showing the transfers, Tom's will, Tom's letter. She read everything. Then she looked up at me and said this was bad, but not hopeless. She said financial elder abuse was a crime, federal and state. She said power of attorney didn't give David the right to steal. It gave him the responsibility to act in my best interest. And draining my accounts while I buried my husband was not in my best interest. She said we'd need to file a police report, freeze any remaining assets, petition the court to revoke the power of attorney, sue David for return of the funds. All of it would take time, months, maybe longer, and it would cost money. Money I didn't have. She saw my face, the panic, the impossible math. She said she'd take the case on contingency. She'd get paid when I got paid, if I got paid. She said I'd need to be prepared for this to get ugly. David would fight. He'd hired his own lawyers. He'd claim I gave him the money, that I was confused, incompetent, grieving and irrational, that I'd signed willingly. Patricia said family cases were the worst. People said terrible things, dug up old grudges, turned siblings against each other, turned grandkids into weapons. She asked if I was ready for that. I thought about Tom, about his letter, about 37 years of building something, about the house we'd paid off, about the retirement we'd planned, about the peace we'd earned. Then I looked Patricia in the eye and said, yes, I'm ready. We filed the police report Friday morning. Patricia went with me. The police station smelled like old coffee and disinfectant. We sat in a small room with a detective named Marshall. He looked tired, like he'd seen this exact story 100 times. He took my statement, asked the same questions Patricia had asked, wrote everything down. Then he said cases like this were complicated, civil and criminal. The money was gone, but technically David had legal authority when he took it. That made it murkier, harder to prosecute. He said he'd open an investigation, talk to the bank, get records, but he couldn't promise anything. He said my best bet was civil court, sue David, get a judgment, force him to pay it back, but that would take time. And David could appeal, drag it out, hide assets, make it difficult. Marshall said I should prepare for a long fight. He said most families settled, worked it out privately, avoided court, avoided the publicity, the cost, the emotional damage. I thanked him, took his card. Patricia and I walked back to her car. She was quiet. Finally, she said we needed to move fast. She'd file an emergency petition Monday morning, ask the court to freeze David's accounts, revoke the power of attorney, order a full accounting of where my money went. She said we'd need evidence that I wasn't incompetent, wasn't confused, that I understood what happened, that I was capable of handling my own affairs. She said that meant medical records, statements from people who knew me, proof I was functional, sharp, victim of manipulation, not dementia. That last word stung. Like even in fighting for myself, I had to prove I was worthy of my own money, my own life. Patricia dropped me off at home. The house was dark. I'd forgotten to leave a light on. I stood in the driveway for a minute, looking at it. This house, our house, Tom's and mine, paid for with 30 years of work, his paycheck, my part-time jobs when the kids were small, every dollar saved, every sacrifice made. Now I had to fight to keep it. Because David had decided he wanted his inheritance early, and he didn't care if it destroyed me. My phone buzzed. Text from Sarah. David called. He wants to meet. Says we need to talk, like a family. Tomorrow, his house. He says it's all a misunderstanding. He wants to fix it. I read it twice. Then I called Patricia. She said, don't go alone. Don't agree to anything. Don't sign anything. Record everything if you can. She said David was scared. The police report had probably reached him. He knew I wasn't rolling over. He was trying to control the narrative, trying to get me to back down before this went public, before his friends, his neighbors, his colleagues found out he'd stolen from his widowed mother. I told Sarah I'd go, but she was coming with me, and I wasn't signing anything. Saturday afternoon, David's house, big colonial in a neighborhood with HOA regulations and matching mailboxes. Sarah picked me up. We drove in silence. She was angry. I was nervous. My stomach hurt. I kept thinking about the last time I'd been to this house, 6 months ago. Tom's birthday. David and Jessica had hosted. There was cake, balloons, the grandkids running around the yard, Tom blowing out candles, looking happy, looking healthy, looking like he had years left. Now he was gone, and I was walking into my son's house to confront him about stealing my future. Jessica answered the door. She looked uncomfortable, wouldn't meet my eyes, led us to the living room. Formal space, white furniture nobody actually sat on. David was standing by the fireplace, suit, no tie, like he'd just come from the office, or like he wanted to look professional, in control. He smiled, that same smile I'd seen my whole life, the smile that used to make me feel proud. Now it made my skin crawl. He said thanks for coming, said we needed to clear things up, said there'd been a misunderstanding. He gestured to the couch. Sarah and I sat. Jessica disappeared, went upstairs. I could hear her moving around, hiding. David sat across from us in a leather chair, leaned back, relaxed, like this was a business meeting, like I was a client he needed to manage. He said he'd heard I went to the police, said that was unnecessary, embarrassing. He said he'd been trying to help me, said I'd asked him to handle things, said I'd been too upset to deal with finances, bills, logistics. He said moving the money was protective, keeping it safe, managing it properly, making sure I didn't make mistakes while I was grieving. Sarah said, "Where's the money then? Show us the accounts. Show us how you're protecting it." David's smile tightened. He said it was complicated. Investments, trusts, tax strategies, things I wouldn't understand. Sarah laughed, cold, mean. She said, "Try us." David said he'd used some of it to pay off debts, Tom's medical bills, funeral costs, house expenses. He said he'd been covering things, taking care of me. He'd tell me about it when I calmed down, when I was thinking clearly. That's when I felt it, the shift, the anger. I'd been sad, scared, confused, but now I was just angry. I said, "Where are the receipts? Show me the bills you paid. Show me the funeral invoice, the hospital charges. Prove you spent my money on me." David stared. Then he said, "Mom, you're not well. You're grieving. You're not thinking straight. You signed the papers. You gave me authority. You trusted me. And now you're listening to Sarah, to lawyers, to people who want to cause problems." He said if I dropped this, if I apologized to the police, if I let him handle things the way we'd agreed, everything would be fine. He'd make sure I was comfortable, secure, taken care of. But if I kept pushing, kept accusing, kept embarrassing him, then things would get difficult. He'd have to protect himself, protect his reputation. He'd have to prove I wasn't competent, that I needed help, that I couldn't be trusted with my own decisions. It wasn't a threat exactly, but it was close enough. Sarah stood up, said we were leaving. David said wait. He pulled out a folder, set it on the coffee table between us. He said there was a solution, a compromise. He'd been talking to lawyers, financial planners. They'd worked out an arrangement. I'd sign over the house to him. He'd manage it, rent it out, use the income to pay for my care. He'd find me a nice assisted living facility, something safe, comfortable, with activities, people my age. I wouldn't have to worry about anything. Bills, maintenance, decisions. He'd handle everything. In exchange, I'd drop the police report, drop the investigation. We'd tell everyone it was a misunderstanding, a miscommunication. We'd keep it in the family, private, dignified. He pushed the folder toward me, said I should look it over, take my time, think about it. But he needed an answer by Monday. There was a pause, silence so thick I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. Then I stood up, picked up the folder, held it for a moment. David was smiling again, like he'd won, like he'd backed me into a corner and I was taking the easy way out. I opened the folder, looked at the first page. Petition for guardianship, request for competency evaluation, draft contract for transfer of property. All of it prepared, ready, waiting for my signature. I closed the folder, looked at my son, this man I'd raised, fed, loved, sacrificed for, this man who'd given a eulogy about how much his father meant to him, how much family mattered, how grateful he was for everything we'd taught him. I said no. David's smile disappeared. He said I was making a mistake, a big mistake. I said maybe, but it was my mistake to make. I said I didn't need his management, his protection, his control. I said I wanted my money back, all of it, with interest, and if he didn't return it willingly, I'd see him in court. Then I walked out. Sarah followed. We got to the car. She was shaking. Adrenaline, fear, pride. She said that was the bravest thing she'd ever seen. I said it was the angriest. We drove home, didn't talk. When she dropped me off, she hugged me, said she'd stand with me, whatever happened, whatever it cost. I went inside, fed the cat, made tea I didn't drink, sat at the kitchen table in the dark. My phone buzzed. Text from David, long, detailed, said I'd humiliated him, disrespected him, accused him in front of his wife. His neighbors might have heard, his kids might find out. He said I'd forced his hand. He was filing for guardianship. He'd prove I wasn't competent, wasn't stable, that I needed supervision. He'd protect me, whether I wanted it or not. Then a second text, from a number I didn't recognize, screenshot of a group chat, family group chat I wasn't part of, messages from David, telling cousins, aunts, uncles that I was having a breakdown, that grief had broken me, that I was accusing him of terrible things, making wild claims. He was asking for prayers, support, help managing me. The messages were sympathetic, concerned, people saying they'd noticed I seemed off at the funeral, seemed confused, distant. They'd reach out, check on me, make sure I was okay. My reputation was being destroyed, quietly, carefully, in family group chats and church parking lots and phone calls between people who'd known me for decades. And I had no way to defend myself without sounding exactly like David said I sounded. Paranoid, irrational, broken. I put the phone down, looked around the kitchen. This room where I'd made breakfast for 40 years, where I'd packed school lunches, where Tom and I had our coffee every morning, where we'd made our plans, our promises, our life. The closing on the house was in my mind. Not a real closing, but the closing of who I used to be, the mother who trusted, who made excuses, who protected her children's feelings above her own truth. That person was gone, and I wasn't sure who was left, but I was about to find out. Sunday morning. I didn't go to church. First time in 20 years I'd missed Sunday service without being sick or out of town. I couldn't face it, couldn't face the whispers, the concerned looks, the people asking how I was doing in that voice that meant they'd already heard something, already believed David's version. Sarah called, said she'd heard from 3 different relatives, all saying they were worried about me, all asking if I was okay, if I needed help. She said she'd told them the truth, but they didn't believe her. David was calm, successful, trustworthy. I was the grieving widow, emotional, unreliable. The story wrote itself. Patricia called too, said David had filed, emergency petition for guardianship, competency hearing scheduled for 2 weeks from Monday. She said we needed to prepare. Get doctors' statements, character witnesses, bank records showing I'd been managing my finances perfectly before Tom died. She said David was moving fast, trying to get control before I could build a defense. She said the judge would look at the whole picture, David's claims versus my evidence. But judges were cautious. If there was any doubt about my competency, they'd err on the side of protection, especially with a family member offering to help. Patricia said I needed to be perfect for the next 2 weeks. No mistakes, no emotional outbursts, no behavior that could be twisted into evidence of instability. I spent Sunday organizing, files, documents, proof. I made a timeline. Every conversation with David, every text, every transfer. I printed bank statements going back 5 years, showing steady management, no impulsive purchases, no signs of confusion. Tom and I had lived carefully, saved diligently. We weren't rich, but we were smart, responsible. That was my defense. Not emotion, not anger, just facts, numbers, proof that I'd been managing fine until David decided to help himself. Monday morning, Patricia filed our response. Denial of incompetency, request to dismiss, counterclaim for return of stolen funds. It went public, not TV news public, but courthouse public, local legal notices. Anyone could look it up. David Thompson petitioning for guardianship of his mother, Margaret Thompson. Margaret Thompson claiming financial elder abuse. The story was out there now. In the system, unavoidable. My phone started ringing. Friends, neighbors, people from church, some genuinely concerned, some clearly fishing for details. I didn't answer. Let it go to voicemail. Listened to the messages later. Most were kind, awkward. A few were pointed. One woman said she'd heard about the situation, said it was such a shame when families couldn't work things out privately, said it must be hard on David, having to deal with this, having to take legal action against his own mother. She didn't mention that it might be hard on me, having my son steal everything I had. That didn't fit her version of the story. Tuesday afternoon, a car pulled into my driveway. Woman I didn't recognize. professional clothes, clipboard. She knocked. I answered. She said she was from Adult Protective Services. There'd been a report, concerns about my welfare, my safety, my ability to care for myself. She needed to do a home visit, assessment, standard procedure. I let her in, walked her through the house, kitchen clean, bathroom clean, bedroom made, refrigerator stocked, bills organized on the desk, cat fed and healthy. She asked questions. How was I eating, sleeping, managing medications? Did I need help with anything? Did I feel safe? Was anyone pressuring me? I answered calmly, showed her my pill organizer, showed her the calendar where I tracked appointments, showed her Tom's letter, showed her the police report. She took notes, said she'd file her report, said everything looked fine, but the fact that she'd been there, that David had called APS, that there was now an official file somewhere with my name and the word concerns, that was the point. Building his case, creating documentation, making me look vulnerable, dependent, in need of management. Wednesday, I had my doctor's appointment. Patricia had arranged it. Dr. Patel, my primary care physician for 15 years. He did a full cognitive assessment, memory tests, problem solving, current events. He asked about Tom, about my grief, about how I was coping. I told him the truth, that I was sad, angry, scared, but functional. He said grief wasn't incompetency. Emotion wasn't instability. He said he'd write a letter for the court, stating that I was mentally sound, capable, competent to manage my affairs. He said he'd seen real dementia, real cognitive decline. I wasn't close, not even in the same county. Thursday, Patricia and I met with a forensic accountant, woman named Diane. She specialized in financial cases. She looked at David's transfers, traced where the money went. Most of it was still in accounts under his name. He'd moved it, hidden it, spread it across different banks, different investments, but it wasn't gone, not spent, not lost, just stolen. Diane said that was good news. It meant recovery was possible, if we won, if the judge ordered David to return it. She said David would claim he'd been managing it, investing it, making it grow. But the patterns were wrong. He'd used some for personal expenses, house payment, car payment, vacation, credit card bills. That wasn't management. That was theft. Diane said her report would be clear, detailed, damning. Patricia said we had a good case, strong case, but David would argue that I'd authorized everything, that the power of attorney was legitimate, that I'd signed willingly, that I'd only changed my mind later because Sarah had gotten involved, because I was confused, because I couldn't accept that I needed help. It would come down to credibility, who the judge believed, the successful son trying to help his unstable mother, or the widow fighting to keep what was hers. Friday evening, Sarah came over, brought dinner, soup from the deli down the street. We ate in silence. Then she said she'd been thinking about the hearing, about what David would say. She said we needed more than documents, more than expert reports. We needed people, witnesses who knew me, who could testify that I was sharp, capable, independent, not some confused old woman. She'd already started making calls, old friends, church members, Tom's co-workers, people who'd known us for decades. Most were willing, some were hesitant, didn't want to get involved, didn't want to choose sides, didn't want to be part of family drama. Sarah said that was fine. We only needed a few, people who'd tell the truth, who'd say I was the same person I'd always been, grieving but not broken, angry but not irrational, fighting but not confused. We made a list. 5 people who'd agreed to write statements, 3 who'd testify in person if needed. It felt like preparing for battle, assembling an army, all because my son decided his inheritance mattered more than my survival. The weekend before the hearing, I couldn't sleep, kept running through scenarios, what David would say, what I'd say, what the judge would ask. Patricia had prepared me, walked me through possible questions, possible attacks. She said David's lawyer would try to rattle me, make me angry, emotional, prove I was unstable. She said I needed to stay calm, answer clearly, stick to facts, don't explain, don't justify, just answer. Saturday afternoon, Jessica showed up, David's wife. I almost didn't answer the door, but curiosity won. She stood on my porch looking nervous, said she needed to talk to me. Alone. I let her in, made coffee, neither of us drank. She sat at the kitchen table, same table where Tom and I had breakfast, where David had eaten cereal before school, where we'd celebrated birthdays and holidays and ordinary Tuesday nights. Jessica twisted her wedding ring, said she didn't know. About the money, about David's plan. She'd known about the power of attorney. But David told her it was temporary, protective, standard procedure. She didn't know he'd emptied my accounts, didn't know about the guardianship petition. She'd found out when the court papers arrived. David had tried to hide them, but she'd seen the envelope, read everything. She was horrified. She'd confronted him. He'd defended himself, said I was confused, couldn't manage money, would make mistakes. He was protecting me, protecting my legacy, making sure I didn't lose everything. Jessica said she didn't believe him, said she'd seen me, talked to me. I was fine, sad, but fine. She said she couldn't testify, couldn't go against her husband, her marriage, her family. But she wanted me to know she didn't support this, didn't agree. She was sorry. She wished things were different. Then she left, drove away in her expensive car back to her expensive house, bought with money David earned and money David stole. I appreciated the gesture, the guilt, the apology. But it didn't change anything. She wouldn't help me, wouldn't speak up, wouldn't risk her comfortable life to tell the truth. That's how people survive, by looking away, by staying quiet, by protecting themselves. I didn't blame her, but I didn't forgive her either. Sunday night, I laid out my clothes for Monday. Blouse, slacks, simple jewelry. Patricia said, look put together but not overdressed. Look like yourself. Competent, organized, normal. I set my alarm, tried to sleep, couldn't. Lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about Tom, about the letter he'd written, about the appointment he'd made, about how he'd tried to protect me, how he'd known. Somehow he'd known what David was capable of, and he'd tried to stop it, but he'd run out of time. Now I was fighting alone, for both of us, for the life we'd built, for the future he'd wanted me to have. The clock on the wall showed 3 a.m, 4, 5, finally 6, light starting to creep through the curtains. Monday, the hearing, the day everything would change, one way or another. The courthouse was downtown, old building with marble floors and high ceilings. Sarah drove, held my hand in the parking lot, said it would be okay. We'd win. Truth always won. I wanted to believe her. Patricia met us in the hallway outside the courtroom. She had files, documents, statements, everything organized, professional. She went over the plan one more time. I'd testify first, then David, then witnesses. Then the judge would decide. Simple. Patricia said the judge was fair, experienced. She'd seen these cases before. She'd ask hard questions, but she'd listen. That was all we could ask for. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Wood paneling, rows of benches, the judge's bench up front, empty. David was already there, sitting with his lawyer. Expensive suit, expensive briefcase, expensive confidence. He glanced at me, no expression, like I was a stranger, a problem to solve, a case to win. We sat on the opposite side, Sarah between me and David, physical barrier, emotional support. The bailiff called the court to order. Judge Brennan walked in. Woman, maybe 60, gray hair pulled back, reading glasses on a chain. She sat, looked at both sides, said this was a preliminary hearing. Emergency petition for temporary guardianship. She'd hear arguments, review evidence, make a decision. Not a trial, not final. Just a determination of immediate necessity. She looked at David's lawyer, Mr. Harrison, older man, silver hair, smooth voice. He stood, said his client David Thompson was deeply concerned about his mother. She'd suffered a devastating loss, her husband of 37 years. She was grieving, understandably, but her grief had impaired her judgment. She was making irrational decisions, accusing family members, filing false reports. She'd recently signed over financial power of attorney to David, recognized she needed help. But now, influenced by outside parties, she was trying to revoke it. She was putting herself at risk, financial risk, personal risk. David was requesting temporary guardianship, not to control her, but to protect her, until she stabilized, until her grief resolved, until she could think clearly again. The court's responsibility was to protect vulnerable adults. Margaret Thompson qualified. She needed help, whether she admitted it or not. Harrison sat down, smug, like he'd already won. Judge Brennan looked at Patricia. She stood, said this wasn't about grief or vulnerability. It was about theft. David Thompson had exploited his mother's trust, manipulated her in the hospital while her husband was dying, obtained power of attorney under false pretenses, then systematically drained her accounts. Over $200,000, life savings, retirement funds, security, gone. Margaret Thompson wasn't incompetent. She was victimized. She'd filed a police report, hired a lawyer, organized evidence, defended herself. Those weren't actions of someone who needed guardianship. Those were actions of someone fighting back. Patricia said David's petition was retaliation, an attempt to silence his mother, control the narrative, avoid criminal charges. The court shouldn't enable financial abuse by granting guardianship to the abuser. Judge Brennan nodded, made notes, said she'd hear testimony. They called David first. He walked to the witness stand, swore to tell the truth, sat down, confident, rehearsed. Harrison asked him questions, soft, leading. When did you first become concerned about your mother? David said right after his father died. She seemed confused, disoriented, couldn't make simple decisions, forgot things, repeated herself. He'd been worried she couldn't handle finances, bills, the house. He'd suggested the power of attorney for her protection. She'd agreed, signed willingly, was grateful. For weeks, everything was fine. He managed her accounts, paid bills, made sure she was stable. Then suddenly she'd changed, become hostile, accusatory, claimed he'd stolen from her. He didn't understand what happened. Maybe Sarah had influenced her. Maybe she was just struggling with grief. Either way, she clearly wasn't thinking straight. Harrison asked about the money, the transfers. David said he'd moved funds to better accounts, higher interest, better management. Some he'd used to pay her bills, house expenses, utilities. Everything was documented. Everything was legitimate. Harrison asked if David had benefited personally. David paused, then said he'd borrowed some, temporarily, against his future inheritance. He'd pay it back, with interest. He'd planned to discuss it with his mother when she was more stable, more rational. It wasn't theft. It was family helping family. Harrison sat. Patricia stood. She asked David about the timing. You obtained power of attorney while your father was dying, in the ICU, while your mother was sitting vigil. David said yes, but she'd been grateful for help. Patricia said you moved the money within days of his death, while your mother was planning his funeral. David said she was too emotional to manage finances. Patricia said you moved over $200,000 to accounts in your name alone, not joint accounts, not trusts. Your name, David said, for better management. Patricia said you used some of that money to pay your mortgage, your car loan, your credit cards. David's face tightened. He said he'd borrowed against his inheritance. It wasn't illegal. Patricia said your mother isn't dead. Her inheritance isn't yours yet, and using her money without permission is called theft. Harrison objected. Judge Brennan sustained. But the point was made. Patricia asked about the APS report. You called Adult Protective Services on your mother. David said he was concerned. Patricia said you filed for guardianship. David said to protect her. Patricia said to control her, to silence her, to avoid prosecution. David said no. Patricia said you told family members she was having a breakdown. David said she was acting irrationally. Patricia said she was acting appropriately. You stole her money. She reported you. You're retaliating. Harrison objected. Judge Brennan overruled. Patricia said no more questions. David stepped down. He looked rattled, angry, less confident. Then they called me. I walked to the witness stand on legs that felt like water, swore to tell the truth, sat down, folded my hands to stop them shaking. Patricia asked me my name, age, how long I'd lived in this town. Simple questions, grounding questions. Then she asked about Tom, about his death, about the hospital. I told her about sitting by his bed, about being exhausted, about David showing up with papers. I said I trusted him. He was my son. I thought he was helping. Patricia asked if I read the documents before signing. I said no. My glasses were in the waiting room. I was tired, scared. I signed what he told me to sign. Patricia asked when I discovered the money was gone. I said 3 days after the funeral. I needed to pay a bill. Checked my account. Everything was gone. Patricia asked what I did. I said I called the bank. Then I called David. He didn't answer. He texted saying everything was fine. Patricia asked how that made me feel. I said betrayed, terrified, alone. Patricia asked if I was confused, disoriented, unable to make decisions. I said no. I was grieving, but I was clear. I knew what happened. I knew what I needed to do. Patricia asked about my daily life, my functioning. I told her I cook, clean, pay bills, manage the house, drive, shop, make appointments, take care of my cat, visit friends. I'm sad, but I'm capable. Patricia showed me Dr. Patel's letter, asked me to read the conclusion. I read it. Margaret Thompson shows no signs of cognitive impairment, dementia, or incompetency. She is grieving the loss of her husband. This is normal, healthy, not a basis for guardianship. Patricia asked if I wanted David to have control of my life, my money, my decisions. I said no. Patricia asked if I'd signed the power of attorney willingly or under duress. I said duress. She said no more questions. Harrison stood. He looked at me like I was a puzzle, a problem. He asked how old I was. I said 62. He said my husband handled the finances during our marriage. I said yes. He said so I had limited experience managing money. I said I managed our household budget, our savings, for 40 years. He said, but Tom made the big decisions. I said we made decisions together. He said I must miss him terribly. I said yes. He said grief can be overwhelming. I said yes. He said it can cloud judgment. I said I suppose. He said so, it's possible I misunderstood David's intentions. Possible. I overreacted. I said no. He said I'd accused my son of theft, called the police, hired a lawyer. Those were serious accusations, heavy accusations. Was I certain? I said yes. He said I was willing to destroy my relationship with my son, divide my family, air private matters in public court, all because I disagreed with how he managed my money. I said he didn't manage my money. He took it. He said the power of attorney was legal. I said, obtained through manipulation. He said I signed it. I said under duress. He said I'd trusted David my whole life, relied on him, been proud of him. Now, suddenly he was a criminal. Had something changed in him? Or had something changed in me? That question hung in the air, the implication clear. I was the one who'd changed, become paranoid, irrational, unstable. I took a breath, looked at the judge, said my son stole over $200,000 from me while I was burying my husband. That's not paranoia. That's crime. And I want it back. Harrison said no more questions. I stepped down, walked back to my seat. Sarah squeezed my hand. Patricia nodded. They called witnesses. Dr. Patel testified. Said I was mentally sound, cognitively intact, grieving but functional. Sarah's best friend Michelle testified. Said she'd known me 20 years. I was sharp, organized, capable, always had been. Nothing had changed except Tom's death, and that was grief, not incompetence. Tom's former co-worker Frank testified. Said Tom had mentioned concerns about David, about protecting me. Tom had been worried, proactive, not confused. Frank said I'd called him after Tom died, asked for advice. I'd been clear, articulate, determined, not someone who needed a guardian. They called the forensic accountant, Diane. She presented her report, showed where the money went. David's mortgage, car payment, credit cards, vacation to Florida, new furniture, personal expenses mixed with my money. She said this wasn't asset management. It was theft, clear, documented, provable. Harrison tried to cross-examine, asked if David had moved some money to investment accounts. Diane said yes, small amounts. Most stayed liquid, easily accessible, for his use. Harrison asked if investments could be considered management. Diane said managing someone else's money without their knowledge or benefit isn't management. It's embezzlement. Judge Brennan called a 15-minute recess. We stood in the hallway. Patricia said she thought it went well. The evidence was strong, the testimony was clear, but judges were unpredictable, especially in family cases, especially when a son claimed he was trying to help. We waited. 15 minutes felt like 15 hours. Finally, the bailiff called us back. We sat. Judge Brennan returned, looked at her notes, looked at both sides. Then she spoke. She said she'd reviewed the evidence carefully, the testimony, the documents, the financial records. She said this was a difficult case, a family in crisis, a son claiming concern, a mother claiming abuse. But the evidence pointed in one direction. The power of attorney had been obtained during an extreme emotional crisis. The mother was sitting vigil while her husband died. She was exhausted, vulnerable. She signed documents she didn't read, didn't understand. The son moved quickly. Within days of the father's death, substantial sums were transferred. Not to joint accounts, not to trusts, to accounts solely in the son's name. Some of that money was used for personal expenses. The son claimed he was managing assets, but management requires transparency, communication, benefit to the principal. None of those elements were present. Judge Brennan said the mother had responded appropriately, filed a police report, sought legal counsel, organized evidence, defended her interests. These were not actions of an incompetent person. These were actions of a competent person responding to financial abuse. The petition for guardianship was denied. The power of attorney was revoked immediately. Effective now. David Thompson no longer had any authority over his mother's finances, decisions. Furthermore, the court was ordering a full accounting of all transferred funds. David Thompson was ordered to return all assets within 30 days, with interest. If he failed to comply, the court would impose penalties, garnish wages, seize assets, whatever was necessary to make Margaret Thompson whole. The judge said she was also referring the case to the district attorney for review, possible prosecution. Financial elder abuse was a crime. This case warranted investigation. She said she hoped the family could heal, but healing required accountability, truth, justice. Without those things, reconciliation was just enabling. She banged her gavel. Case closed. Hearing adjourned. I sat there stunned. Sarah was crying. Patricia was gathering papers. David was standing with his lawyer. His face was white, furious, humiliated. He looked at me once. Pure hatred. Then he turned and walked out. Didn't say a word. Harrison followed. Jessica was in the hallway. I saw her through the courtroom doors. She touched David's arm. He shook her off, kept walking. We stood. Patricia hugged me, said we'd won, said she'd file the civil suit tomorrow. Make sure David paid back every cent. Make sure I was protected. We walked out to the hallway. People were staring. Word had spread. The case had been public. The outcome would be too. I didn't care anymore. Let them stare. Let them talk. I'd told the truth. The judge had believed me. That was enough. Sarah drove me home. We didn't talk. Didn't need to. When we pulled into my driveway, when I saw my house, our house, still mine, still safe, I started crying. Not sad crying. Relief crying. Exhausted crying. 40 years of trust. 37 years of marriage. 3 weeks of hell. And I'd survived. We went inside. Sarah made tea. We sat at the kitchen table. She said she was proud of me. Said Dad would be proud too. I thought about Tom, about his letter, about how he'd tried to warn me, tried to protect me. He'd known something was wrong with David. Known before I did, before I wanted to see it. I pulled out his letter, read it again. Make sure the house stays in your name. Make sure nobody can touch anything until you're gone. He'd tried. He'd run out of time. But he'd left me the warning, the proof that I wasn't crazy, wasn't imagining things. Tom had seen it too. That letter had saved me, given me courage, shown me I wasn't fighting alone. Even though he was gone, Tom was still protecting me, still loving me, still making sure I'd be okay. The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork, legal filings, bank meetings. Patricia filed the civil suit. David had 30 days to return the money. He hired lawyers, filed appeals, tried to delay, tried to negotiate, offered to return half, then 2/3, then 90% if I'd drop the criminal referral. I said no, all of it, every cent, with interest, and the district attorney could do whatever they deemed appropriate. I wasn't controlling that, wasn't protecting him anymore. The police investigation continued. Detective Marshall called me twice, asked questions, confirmed details. He said cases like this were hard to prosecute, but this one was solid. Clear paper trail, clear intent, clear harm. He said the DA was considering charges, wire fraud, elder abuse, theft. David could face prison time, could lose his professional licenses, his reputation, everything he'd built. Part of me felt sick about that. He was still my son, still the boy I'd raised, but a bigger part of me felt nothing. He'd made his choices, calculated, deliberate, cruel. Now he'd face the consequences. That's how life worked. Actions had costs. He'd gambled that I'd be too weak, too ashamed, too protective to fight back. He'd lost. At week 3, David's lawyer called Patricia. David was ready to return the funds, all of them, plus interest, plus legal fees. In exchange, he wanted me to write a letter to the DA, asking them not to prosecute, saying it was a family matter, resolved privately. Patricia asked what I wanted to do. I thought about it, thought about David in prison, about his kids growing up with a father behind bars, about Jessica struggling alone, about the family fracturing beyond repair. I thought about what Tom would want. Tom, who believed in second chances, who believed people could change, who believed in grace even when it hurt. But Tom also believed in accountability, in consequences, in teaching lessons even when they were hard. I told Patricia to tell David's lawyer I'd consider the letter, after the money was returned, after every cent was back in my account, after I could verify it, after I had proof. Then I'd think about it, not a promise, a possibility. David had 4 days left. On day 29, the money appeared. Wire transfer, $217,462, principal plus interest, plus my legal fees. Every penny accounted for. I sat at my computer staring at the balance. It was back. My security, my future, Tom's legacy, everything we'd built, everything David had taken, returned. Not because he was sorry, but because he was cornered, because the law forced him, because he was more afraid of prison than of losing his mother. That knowledge hurt worse than the theft. I called Patricia, told her the money was in. She said good. Now the decision was mine. Write the letter or don't. She said the DA would likely prosecute anyway. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about precedent, about protecting other vulnerable people, about sending a message that financial elder abuse had consequences. But a letter from me would carry weight, the victim asking for mercy. It could make a difference. I sat with it for 2 days, prayed about it, talked to Sarah. She said she'd support whatever I decided. If I wanted David prosecuted, she'd stand with me. If I wanted mercy, she'd understand. She said he was her brother. She loved him, but she didn't recognize him anymore, didn't know who he'd become, didn't know if he could come back from this. I thought about the last time I saw David before all this, at Tom's birthday party, 6 months ago, before the heart attack, before the hospital, before the theft. David had been charming that day, funny, attentive. He'd brought expensive wine, told stories about work, played with his kids in the yard, hugged Tom, said he loved him, said family was everything. Had he meant it? Or was he already planning, already calculating, already waiting for his moment? I'd never know. Finally, I wrote the letter, not for David, for his kids, for Jessica, for the possibility, however slim, that accountability might lead to change. I wrote that the money had been returned, that I'd been made whole financially, that I believed prison would serve no purpose, that I hoped David would seek therapy, make amends, become someone his children could respect. I wrote that I was willing to let the legal system handle this through restitution rather than incarceration. But I also wrote that if David ever came near me again, ever contacted me, ever tried to manipulate or control or hurt me or anyone else in the family, I'd pursue every legal remedy available. This was mercy, once, not forgiveness, not reconciliation, not trust, just mercy. I signed it, sent it to Patricia. She forwarded it to the DA. The DA considered it, along with the evidence, the circumstances, David's lack of criminal history, his cooperation in returning the funds. They decided not to file criminal charges, but they required David to enter a pre-trial diversion program, supervised restitution, mandatory financial counseling, regular check-ins. If he completed the program, the case would be sealed. If he violated any terms, charges would be filed immediately. David agreed. He had no choice. That was 8 months ago. I haven't seen David since the hearing. Haven't spoken to him. He's completed 6 months of the diversion program. 2 months left. Sarah gives me updates sometimes, says he's complying, going to counseling, keeping his job. Jessica is still with him. They're in marriage therapy, trying to rebuild, trying to understand how it got this bad. The kids don't know the details, just that Grandpa died and the family had some legal issues that are being worked out. Someday they'll know. Someday they'll ask questions. I don't know what I'll say. The truth, probably. Age appropriate, honest. Kids deserve to know who their parents really are, good and bad. My life has settled into something new, something quieter. I still live in the house. Tom's house. Our house. Mine now. Completely. Legally. Permanently. Protected. I've updated the will. Everything goes into a trust when I die. Sarah is the trustee. David gets his share, but he can't touch it until certain conditions are met. Can't borrow against it. Can't manipulate it. It's ironclad. Patricia made sure of that. I've made new friends. Joined a grief support group at church. People who understand loss. Who don't ask me to be over it. Who let me be sad and angry and healing all at the same time. I've started volunteering at a local legal aid clinic, helping other seniors who've been taken advantage of, financially abused, scammed, stolen from. I know the signs now, know the patterns, know how to fight back. I can help. I do help. It gives me purpose, turns my pain into something useful. Sarah comes over every Sunday, brings the grandkids. We make dinner together, play in the yard, do normal things. She never mentions David unless I ask. We've learned to exist around the hole he left, the space where a son and brother used to be. Maybe someday he'll be back, different, honest, humble. Maybe someday I'll be ready to see him, to sit across a table and have a conversation that isn't about lawyers and money and betrayal. Maybe, but not today. Today I'm okay with the distance, with the boundaries, with protecting myself. That's not selfish. It's necessary. It's survival. It's what Tom would have wanted for me. Last week I was cleaning out the garage, found a box of old photos, pictures of David as a kid, missing teeth, Little League uniform, birthday parties, Christmas mornings. He was sweet once, loving, easy to please. Somewhere along the way, something changed. Or maybe it was always there, the ambition, the entitlement, the belief that he deserved more, that rules didn't apply to him, that people were resources to be managed. I don't know when it started. Don't know if I could have stopped it. Parenting is full of questions with no answers, guilt with no resolution. You do your best, love your kids, teach them right from wrong. Then they become adults, make choices, live with consequences. You can't control it, can't fix it, can't take the blame for all of it. I put the photos back in the box, closed it, put it back on the shelf. Memories, not current reality. The difference matters. I also found something else in the garage, Tom's toolbox. I opened it. Hammers, screwdrivers, wrenches, everything organized, everything in its place. Tom was like that, careful, precise. At the bottom, under a rag, was an envelope. My name on the front, Tom's handwriting, another letter. I sat on the garage floor and opened it. This one was dated a week before the first letter, 3 weeks before his heart attack. Tom wrote that he'd been thinking about legacy, about what we leave behind. He said it wasn't money, wasn't property, wasn't stuff. It was character, dignity, how you treated people, how you stood up for yourself, how you demanded to be treated. He said he worried about me, worried I was too kind, too forgiving, too willing to make peace at the expense of my own dignity. He said if something happened to him, if I ever faced a situation where someone tried to take advantage of me, he wanted me to fight. Not because fighting was noble, but because I was worth fighting for. He said I was stronger than I thought, braver than I believed, capable of more than I'd ever had to prove. He said he loved me, was proud of me, trusted me, and if I ever doubted myself, I should read this letter and remember. I sat there holding that letter and cried, big, ugly sobs, relief, grief, gratitude. Tom had known. Somehow he'd known I'd need this, need his voice, his faith in me, his permission to fight. He'd left me 2 letters, 2 lifelines, 2 reminders that I wasn't alone. Even in death, Tom was taking care of me, loving me, making sure I'd be okay. This morning, I woke up to sun coming through the bedroom window, made coffee, fed the cat, sat at the kitchen table with Tom's letters and a photo album. I do this sometimes now, sit with the memories, the good ones. Tom and me on our wedding day, young, hopeful, clueless about what was coming. Tom holding newborn David, newborn Sarah, family vacations, birthday parties, ordinary moments that turned out to be everything. I don't know what the future holds. Don't know if David will finish his program, change, apologize, seek real reconciliation. Don't know if I'll ever be ready to let him back in. Don't know if our family will ever be whole again. But I know I'm okay. I have enough money to live, to be comfortable, to be secure. I have my house, my independence, my dignity. I have Sarah, the grandkids, friends, purpose. I have Tom's letters, his love, his faith in me, and I have proof that I'm stronger than I thought, that I can fight, that I can survive betrayal, that I can stand up and demand what's mine. That's not nothing. That's everything. Some days are hard, some days I'm angry, some days I miss Tom so much I can barely breathe. Some days I look at the phone and hope David will call, will say he's sorry, will admit what he did, will ask how to fix it. But most days I'm just here, living my life, drinking my coffee, feeding my cat, helping other people who are going through what I went through, loving my daughter, spoiling my grandkids, existing in the space between grief and healing. It's not the life I planned, not the ending I expected, but it's mine, and it's enough. Last Sunday, Sarah brought the kids over. We made cookies, chocolate chip, Tom's favorite recipe. The kitchen smelled like butter and sugar. The kids got flour everywhere. We laughed, cleaned up, ate warm cookies at the table. Sarah looked at me and said, "Mom, you're doing great. You're really doing great." I think she was surprised. Maybe I was too. A year ago I was signing papers in a hospital waiting room, trusting, naive, broken by grief. Now I'm sitting in my kitchen, in my house, with my money, with my life, still grieving, still healing, but not broken, not anymore. That's victory. Not the victory I wanted, not the family reconciliation, not the storybook ending, but the real victory, survival, dignity, self-respect. Those things can't be taken, only surrendered. And I'm done surrendering. If this story has touched your heart, subscribe now, leave a like, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. That helps us keep sharing stories of strong women, families, and the unexpected turns of life.